Chapter 1. Oh, wait. Part 1. The Emergence and Limitations of European Radicalism. Chapter 1. Racial Capitalism. The non-objective character of capitalist development. I also got a cool pencil. Ooh. And this is my favorite type of pen. It's very... Right. The historical development of world capitalism was influenced in a most fundamental way by the particularistic forces of racism and nationalism. Let's highlight that. Guys, I literally got this book after... Oh, I just took a couple G's. After my class ended. So I took this class, Black Thought in the Diaspora, and I'm going to read all those books and provide notes because, girl, information, I paid for that class. Y'all going to get it for free. Right? But I got all my books, downloaded instead of having the physical copy. But physical copies, one, the smell of paper, and I wish it was hemp paper because I've learned that it's also, but would hemp be good for books? Probably not. That's something I should definitely research. Let me not write that down because I have too many things at the moment. But I learned that hemp paper might be better for deforestation and stuff like that, which is really cool. Anyways, I got all got all the books on PDFs because I'm in college. I don't have money. Wait, we're gonna pause and put my AirPod in so you can hear me. During my class, I read the books for the class, but on my computer, and then I got the physical copy after the class ended, and I was like, well, but I think reading the physical book is much better because I do feel like I missed information when I was reading off of my computer, but that's it. Then again, burnout. Girl, I was not doing my best work. I'm surprised I got A's in my classes, but I think that because I was just doing school, everything else for me, it was just downhill, but it was okay because at the same time, it was time for me to the universe was sit down to me. Yeah, you know, one of them bad little kids that you're trying to get them to, I probably reminded you of the story. You trying to get them to put clothes on, but they're running outside naked, in circles. That's what I was doing. Figuratively. When I was a kid, literally, but figuratively, yeah. I guess. It was just, I fell down the stairs on my birthday. Y'all, something always weird happens on my birthday. One time, oh, look at that. But one time, I was at campus, and I thought I saw, triplets, because I'm a triplet, and they were all wearing matching black outfits, and I was like, oh my god, triplets. And it's Howard, people like to twin, people like to dress up, dress down, dress left, dress right. I just thought they was regular people, not because what had happened was they beat someone up. What I'm doing, I was like, that's the thing, when I see black people, I don't think danger. So I was not thinking, let me just, where was I at? The historical development of world capitalism was influenced in a most fundamental way by the particularistic forces of racism and nationalism. This could only be true if the social, psychological, and cultural origins of racism and nationalism both anticipated capitalism in time and formed a piece of those events that contributed directly to its organization and production of exchange. Feudal society is key at looking at this process. More particularly, the antagonistic commitments, structures, and ambitions that feudal society encompassed are better conceptualized as those of a developing civilization than elements of a unified tradition. The processes through which the world system emerged contained an opposition between the rationalistic thrusts of an economic worldview and a political momenta of collectivist logic. Oh, okay. In saying that it's working against the political momenta of collectivist logic. Like capitalism is very individualistic, versus people that are innately human. Is kind of what I'm getting at that. The feudal society, an instrument of signal importance to the bourgeoisie, was to prove to be as consistently antithetical to the commercial integration represented by a world system as it had the idea of Christendom. Neither the state nor the nation could slough off the particularistic psychologies and interests that served as contradictions to a global community. A primary consequence of the conflicts between those two social tendencies was that capitalists, as the architects of the system, never achieved the coherence of structure and organization that had been the promise of capitalism as an objective system. It didn't work. That's why it keeps freaking failing out every time, every year. But guess who it's not failing? Guess who it's underserving? Mm-hmm. On the contrary, this history of capitalism was in no way distinguished itself from earlier areas with. On the contrary, the history of capitalism has in no way distinguished itself from the earlier eras with respect to wars, material crises, and social conflicts. A secondary consequence is that the critique. Yeah. On the contrary, the history of capitalism has in no way distinguished itself from earlier eras with respect to wars, material crises, and social conflicts. A secondary consequence is the critique of capitalism, to the extent that its protagonists have based their analysis upon the presumptions of a determinate economic rationality in the development and expansion of capitalism, has been characterized by an incapacity to come to terms with the world system direction of development. Marxism, the dominant form of that critique of capitalism, has assumed in Western thought, incorporated theoretical and ideological weaknesses that stemmed from the same social forces that provided the basis of capitalist formation. Meaning that what Marxism is limited in its critique of Western capitalism, because Marxism is bred in Western thought. You're trying to study the oppressor through the oppressor's lens, born through a lens of the oppressor. You're not going to get a full, well-rounded critique because it's not coming from a different perspective. It's coming from a perspective born within the system. The creation of capitalism rather than a negation, I guess. That's kind of how I see it. The critique of capitalism was much more than a matter of displacement of feudal modes and relations of production by capitalist ones. Certainly, the transformation of the economic structures of non-capitalist Europe, specifically the Mediterranean and Western European market, trade, and productive systems, into capitalistic forms of production and exchange was a major part of this process. Still, the first appearance of capitalism in the 15th century involved other dynamics as well. The social, cultural, political, and ideological complexes of European feudalism contributed more to capitalism than the social fetters that precipitated the bourgeoisie into social and political revolutions. No class was its own creation. Indeed, capitalism was less a catastrophic negation of feudalist society orders than the extension of these social relations into a larger tapestry of the modern world's political and economic relations, meaning feudalism evolved into capitalism rather than capitalism being a negation of feudalism. And its social orders of feudalism. Okay. Historically, the civilization evolving in the western extremities of the Asian/European continent, and whose first signification in medieval Europe, passed with few disjunctions from feudalism as the dominant mode of production to capitalism. Oh, hold up, 1 second. Redo. Historically, the civilization evolving in the western extremities of the Asian European continent, and whose first signification is medieval Europe, passed with few disjunctions from feudalism as the dominant mode of production to capitalism as the dominant mode of production. So yeah, it's like showing it's kind of it just capitalism is feudalism evolving as it became more of a world market. And from its very beginnings, the European civilization, containing racial, tribal, linguistic, and regional particularities, was constructed on antagonistic differences, the basis of racism, I believe. Europe's formation. Europe's formation. The social basis of European civilization was among those whom the Romans called the barbarians. Prior to the 11th and 12th centuries, the use of the collective sense of the term barbarian was primarily a function of exclusion rather than reflection of any significant consolidation among those people. That's racism. That's the idea of racism before race. Like, yeah. And it would be based off of like regional differences, linguistic, racial. Yeah. That's what you just see. But let's highlight it. This term signified that the barbarians had their historical origins beyond the civilizing reach of Roman law and the old Roman Empire social order. Because that's when Romans invaded Egypt. But I feel like that's a little bit... I'm not good with dates, y'all. The term Europe of the 9th century, for which the Carolingian family and its minions claimed paternity, was rather limited geopolitically and had a rather short and unhappy existence. Interestingly, for several centuries following the deaths of Charlemagne and his immediate heirs, the last being Arnulf, he died in 899, both the emperor and Europe were more the stuff of popular legend and a clerical rhetoric than manifestations of social reality. The idea of Europe, no longer a realistic project, was transferred from one of a terrestrial social order to that of a spiritual kingdom, Christendom. In fact, those people to whom the Greeks and the Romans referred collectively as barbarians were of diverse races and widely differing cultures. The diversity of their languages is perhaps one measure of their difference. But in using this measure, we must be cautious of the schemes of classification of those languages that reduce the reality of their numbers to simple groups, like the Celtics, the Italic, the Germanic, the Balto-Slavonic, and Albanian languages. Direct and indirect evidence indicates that a more authentic mapping of the languages of the Proto-Europeans would be much more complex. For instance, H. Munro Chadwick in the late 1945 would locate exact descendants of those several languages among the Gaelic, Welsh, and Breton language of Great Britain and France, the Portuguese, Spanish, Caltan, Provencal. Sorry, y'all. French, Italian, Sardinian, Alpine, and Romanian languages and dialects of Southern and Western Europe. The English, Frisian, Dutch, German, Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, and Icelandic languages of England, Scotland, the Netherlands, Germany, and Scandinavia, the Russian, Bulgarian, Yugoslavian, Slovenian, Slovakian, Czech, Polish, and Lustian languages and dialects of Central and Eastern Europe, and the Latvian and Lithuanian languages of Northern Europe. But even Chadwick's list of these mere... I was knocked off my roll and now I'm not getting back. I got this. Sorry, friends. Sorry, friends. But even Chadwick's list was of merely those languages that had survived the millennium of Europe. The list would lengthen considerably if one were to consider the languages that existed in the area at the beginning of this era and are no longer spoken. For example, Latin, Cornish, and Prusi, Persai, Prusai. Oh, this is trying to reflect the differences within the culture based off of language. That's why all these languages are used, I think. Along with those languages of people who preceded the migration from the north and east of Rome's barbarians. For example, Basque, oh Lord, Etruscan, Oscan, and Uranian. The Ostrogoth, Visigoth, Vandal, Suevi, Burgundy, Alemanni, and Frank peoples, that is, the barbarians, whose impact on the fortunes of the late Roman Empire from the 5th century was quick and dramatic, were in fact a small minority of thousands among millions of the decaying state. Henry Preny, what's the lowercase I? Pirenne, Pirenenne, relying on the estimates of Emily Felix Gutier and L. Schmidt, reported that the Ostrogoth and the Visigoth may have numbered in 100,000 each, the Vandals 800,000, and the Burgundy 25,000. Moreover, the warrior strata of each kingdom are consistently estimated at about 20% of their population. On the other hand, the empire that they invaded contained as many as 50 to 70 million persons. Preny cautiously concludes, all this is conjecture. Our estimate would doubtless be in excess of the truth if, for the western provinces beyond the Limes, we reckoned the Germanic element as constituting 5% of the population. More importantly, the vast majority of the barbarians came not as conquerors, but exactly as, in our day, North Africans, Italians, Poles across the metropolitan France to look for work. That's a good highlight. I think I put this in my notes. In a relatively short time, in the southernmost European lands that were bounded by the Western Roman Empire, these people were entirely assimilated by the indigenous peoples as a primary slave labor force. This is highlighting how racism before race won, and then slavery within the feudal society shows is highlighting the evolution from feudalism to capitalism, rather than capitalism being a negation of feudalism, and how who was considered quote unquote the first black people. The pattern was already a familiar one with the dying civilization of the Mediterranean, with which they desired and desperately needed to join. It is also important to realize that with respect to the emerging European civilization, whose beginnings coincide at the arrival of these same barbarians, slave labor as a critical basis of production would continue without any significant interruption into the 20th century. Because even think about right now, the 13th Amendment said no slavery unless you're property of the state. mass incarceration, school to prison complex, environmental racism, over-policing and hyper-surveilling of black and brown bodies, not only domestically but internationally. Shall I go? You know what I mean? And that's what this is going to get into. And then the last book of the series would be Pan-Africanism and the African Diaspora, and then after those books, we'll see what happens next. But yeah, it's kind of interesting when you see it all connected together. I mean, not interesting, it's eye-opening. That's a better word. From the Familia Rustia, it's Familia I'm yelling. Rustica, that characterized Roman and even earlier Greek. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Doulos rural production with vast estates through the Municipia of the Galicia colonies and the Mansi. I hope they explain these words. I think he does. He always does. And if not, we'll have a discussion after. I have some discussion notes. From 481 to 752 and Carolingian eras, the feudal villains of Western medieval Europe and England, and the Sclavi of the Genesis and Venetian merchant who dominated commercial trade in the Mediterranean from the 13th to the 16th century. Slave labor persisted as an aspect of European agrarian production up to this modern era. They're literally using prison labor now for farming, for fast food like McDonald's and all this stuff to this day. Let's highlight it in blue. Okay, I'm gonna put the page. I need to turn this a little. Neither feudal serfdom nor capitalism had their result. Neither feudalism, serfdom. Jesus. Neither feudal serfdom nor capitalism had as their result the elimination or curtailment of slavery. At the very most, it is argued by some, the organization served to relocate it. See that? It relocates slavery, slave labor, prison labor. 1, global plantation. 2, prisons. And then, what did Frederick Douglass say? When you learn how to read and write, you're unfit to be a slave. 13th Amendment. And then their deliberate underserving of populations that make it so that people don't learn how to read and write at an appropriate level. 13th Amendment. It's unfortunate. But once we see the problems, we can find solutions. So it's not that bad. I mean, it is. But despite the Romanization of the Southern Goths, or even differently because of it, the Germanic tribes did establish the general administrative boundaries that were to mark the nations of modern Western Europe. And then think about Germanic, and then, oh my God, that goes into psychology of race and racism. I'll do a video on that, or I'll post those notes somewhere. Shoot. The kingdoms that they established mainly under the rules of Roman hospitalitas and the accordance with Roman administration were at large measure the predecessors of France, Germany, Spain, and Italy. Aren't they a part of that alliance? Nah, there was like the Allies and then this and that, but they were part of like the Western. Still, we must not forget that in historical reconstruction, a medieval age is to be intervened between 2 ages. Medieval Europe, though still agricultural in economy, was a much cruder existence for slave, peasant, farmer, artisan, landowner. Sorry, I realized that I didn't pronounce that word fully. Existence for slave, peasant, farmer, artisan, landowner, clerk, and nobility alike than had been the circumstances of their predecessors in the empire. Urban life declined, leaving the old cities in ruins. Long-distance trade, especially by sea routes, decayed dramatically. Latouche summarizes the balance sheet of the Moravian economy is singularly disappointing. The now fashionable, if unpleasant, word rot describes it to perfection. Whether in the sphere of town life, commerce, barter, currency, public works, shipping, we find everywhere the same policy of neglect, the same selfish refusal to initiate reform. From this disastrous, drifting laissez-faire, which left men and things as they had always been, pursuing unchanged their traditional ways of life, there sprang the illusion that the ancient world still lingered on. It was, in fact, no more than a facade. Like right now, here in America. Like, think about the ways in which, like the Baltimore rot, how they're just letting that boat sit there with people on it. Anyways, I'm just not gonna. But you see it once we're like the Western world lives in its past and backwards. The Carolingian Empire did little to repair the rot that anticipated the restructuring of Europe in feudal terms. The Muslim conquests of the Mediterranean in the 7th and 8th centuries had deprived the European economies of the urban, commercial, productive, and cultural vitality they required for their reconstruction. Prene put it boldly: the ports and the cities were deserted. The link with the Orient was served, and there was no communication with the Saracen coasts. There was nothing but death. The Carolingian Empire presented the most striking contrast with the Byzantine. It was purely an inland power, but it had no outlets. The Mediterranean territories, formerly the most active portions of the empire, which supported the life of the whole, were now the poorest and the most desolate, the most constantly menaced. The first time in history the axis of Occidental, Occidental, civilization was displaced towards the north, and for many centuries remained between the Seine, Seine, and the Rhine, Seine and the Rhine. And the Germanic people, which had hitherto played only the negative part of destroyers, were now called upon to play a positive part of the reconstruction of European civilization. So they said, take it all down, and now we're going to rebuild it in our image, like they do to indigenous lands everywhere. That's what I'm getting so far. Latouche, though he differed from Pirne, I hope I'm saying his name right. If I'm not, it's okay. But not really, but correct me. But excuse me. Oh, gosh, dang. On many of the particulars of the Caroling response to the loss of the Mediterranean finally concurred. The empire broke up then less than a half a century after its creation, and Charlemagne did nothing to prevent and did not even attempt to delay the development of feudal institutions. So heavy with menace for the future, the world in which there... Oh, and that's like that one of the bases for Anglo-Saxonism is always oriented to the future, and like leaving stuff to... Yeah. Now we have to be a different video. A heavy menace with a heavy... So heavy with menace for the future, a world in which there were no great business concerns, no industries, and with no agricultural activity was predominant. Urban life, trade, and market systems incorporating the goods of long distance trade did not return to Europe until the end of the 11th century at the earliest, and most probably during the 12th century. By then, the depth to which the degradation of European life had fallen is perhaps best expressed by the appearance of commercialized how to say that on YouTube, but CANNIBALISM. Okay.